4. Lost in the darkness. The trio stumbled through the oppressive darkness, their flashlight beams cutting through the blackness but revealing only more shadows. Steve pulled out his phone and glanced at the map, its dim light barely illuminating his face. The exit's on the other side of the basement. This way, he said, though the darkness made it hard to pinpoint their exact location. Here, he said, illuminating a set of stairs with his flashlight. Up these. They climbed up 5 steps and entered a narrow passageway, excitement building as they realized they were almost out of this madhouse. They moved deeper into the passage. Just a little further, Steve insisted, convinced their salvation lay ahead. He imagined the welcoming breeze of the outside world, but instead, they reached a dead end, a solid brick wall blocking their way. Disappointment and confusion washed over them as their hopes of escape crumbled. They retraced their steps into the basement, fumbling through the darkness as the air grew heavier around them. Steve pulled out his phone, its screen casting a faint glow. He zoomed in on the map and studied the layout, his brow furrowing in concentration. There's only one passage leading outside, he said, his voice laced with confusion. That should have been the way out. He muttered to himself, still puzzled by their predicament. There must be some mistake. He looked at the map again, searching for clues that might explain their situation. Perhaps there were 2 basements. But as he scrolled through the digital layout, he found nothing out of the ordinary. The map was clear, yet it felt like they were trapped in a labyrinth of darkness. They stood in silence, the sound of dripping water resounding through the basement, mixed with the faint howling wind from outside. Okay, Steve said, double-checking the map. We came in here and walked across to these steps, then down this passage where the exit should have been. Kevin walked toward the passageway again, flashlight in hand, looking for any signs of an exit. There! Kevin shouted, his beam landing on another set of stairs leading to yet another passage. They quickly made their way toward it, but their hopes were dashed again as they reached another dead end. Kevin pressed his hand against the cold bricks blocking their path. No, he yelled. Dejected, they stepped back into the inky blackness of the basement, their search continuing in vain. Each time they stumbled upon what seemed like a passageway to the outside world, would lead to another dead end. Frustration and exhaustion mounted. Feels like we've been down here for an hour. Kevin groaned, slumping against the wall in exhaustion. We're getting nowhere. How can all these passageways be blocked? It's impossible. Where's the fucking way out of this fucking place? Remember when Dave mentioned Belphalion, the trickster demon? Tanya said, realization dawning on her. This is what it does. It's trying to break us down. I felt its intentions when it tried to take over my mind. Steve rolled his eyes. There are no demons, he replied dismissively. After everything that had happened, Kevin couldn't believe Steve was still skeptical. He recognized it as denial. Suddenly, a faint creak echoed in the stillness. Kevin swung his flashlight toward the sound and saw a red door slightly ajar. A door? Kevin yelled. Let's get the fuck out of here. Okay, Steve replied tightly, his resolve hardening. Let's see where it leads. He pushed the door fully open, and they shone their flashlights into the darkness beyond. Stairs rose before them, their outlines barely visible in the dim light. Without another word, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the basement, they began their ascent. Chapter 25, We Dead? They pushed on in silence for what seemed like an eternity, Kevin's muscles screaming in protest, each step feeling heavier than the last. He felt a relentless burning that shot up his thighs and down his calves. His breath came in shallow gasps, his chest tight with the effort. There seemed to be no end to the stairs. Every time they thought they were reaching the top, there were more stairs waiting ahead. Kevin's legs burned with exhaustion, sweat pouring down his face as he gasped for air. This can't be right, Kevin panted. Is there no end to these fucking stairs? He shone his flashlight ahead, but all it revealed was more stairs. The Tower of Babel, Tanya said, breathless. What? Kevin asked in annoyance. In the Bible, she explained, there's the story of the Tower of Babel, where people try to build a tower to reach the heavens. They think they can achieve anything, but it just leads to confusion and chaos. Kevin shot her a glare, his frustration building. Yeah, thanks for that little piece of useless information. Perspiration poured from Kevin's face, stinging his eyes. He wiped it away with a shaking hand, but it was replaced almost instantly. His legs trembled with every step, threatening to buckle beneath him. Every muscle screamed in agony, but he pushed himself forward, his body refusing to obey his mind's desperate pleas to stop. His thoughts were a blur of exhaustion and pain. He stole a glance at Steve, seeing the same strain on his face, the same look of pure agony and misery. Fuck this shit. Kevin finally protested, his voice raw. I can't go on. My legs can't take it. They are like fucking jelly. He staggered, struggling to lower himself onto the stairs, the motion sending a wave of searing pain through his body. It felt like his muscles were being torn apart with each movement. Let's rest, Steve said through gritted teeth, his own pain evident. He winced as he carefully lowered himself onto a step beside Kevin, his body sagging with relief, though the relief was short-lived, swallowed by the ache that still pulsed through every muscle. So what do we do? Steve asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Do we keep going up or go back down? We must be near the top, there are only 9 floors. Kevin let out a manic, almost delirious laugh. 9 floors? He looked at Steve, disbelief written all over his face. Are you fucking kidding? We must be on the 100th floor by now. He screamed, the only response was the echo of his own hysterical voice. Steve, also, teetering on the brink of a mental collapse, managed a weak smile and quipped, maybe we should have taken the lift. The joke didn't land well. I'm not going back down there, Kevin said, breathing hard. You can fuck right off. Kevin couldn't take it anymore. He felt trapped, lost and hopeless. The frustration and exhaustion consumed him. Why haven't we reached the top? He sobbed hysterically as he buried his head in his hands. I can't take any more, he wailed. Kevin suddenly turned to Steve with wild eyes. Are we dead? We must have fucking died, and this must be fucking hell. Kevin's voice cracked, his mind struggling to find any rational explanation, but that was the only one that made sense. Steve pondered the question. Were they being controlled or manipulated by something far beyond their understanding, as Tanya suggested? A demon? Or were they already dead, trapped in a twisted version of purgatory, as Kevin proposed? He no longer had the answers. These were questions Tanya was better equipped to address, not him. Suddenly, a chilling grip of fear clenched his heart. He looked around, anxiety rising within him. Where was Tanya? Chapter 26, Beast in the Labyrinth. Dave sprinted through a labyrinth of corridors, each one looking like the other, his pulse racing and his mind alive with twisted visions of blood. He reveled in the terror he was about to unleash, each step fueling the madness that churned inside him. As he reached a landing, he stopped, pressing his ear to the silence, straining for any sound that might betray their whereabouts. But all he heard was silence. Then, a whisper drifted from near 2 doors. Over here. A surge of excitement shot through him as he rushed toward the double doors, his senses sharpening. With a wild grin, he pushed them open and plunged into the stairwell, vanishing into the darkness. Chapter 27, Trapped by the Walls of Fear. Tanya was gone. Lost? Swallowed by the infinite blackness. Tanya, they both shouted, their voices cracking with fear. Tanya. Their calls bounced off the walls, but there was no reply, only the eerie echo of their own shouts that seemed to mock them. For a heartbeat, it felt like all hope was lost. But then, a voice, faint, almost distant. "I'm up here," she called. Relief flooded through them. "Guys!" Tanya shouted from the upper depths of the stairwell. "I found a corridor." Steve and Kevin exchanged a quick, determined glance before painfully forcing their exhausted bodies up the stairs, each step a battle against their fatigue. Every movement felt like it drained more of their strength, but they pushed on, drawn by the sound of her voice. "Here," she called again, her voice echoing through the dim space. Kevin swung his flashlight towards Tanya, landing on a small platform at the side of the stairs, leading into a dark, narrow corridor. A wave of euphoria washed over him. Without another word, they stepped onto the landing, the strain of the climb lifting from their legs. Tanya turned to face them, her eyes intense. "I have to tell you something serious, so you need to listen." They both looked at her with worried faces, unsure of what was coming. Tanya glanced around, as if sensing something lurking in the shadows, and began to speak in a near whisper. "Belphalion is using illusions to break us down." Steve cut her off. "Belphalion?" "The demon," she replied. Steve rolled his eyes and sighed. "You need to listen," Tanya yelled, her voice rising for the first time, her expression serious. "The more frightened we are, the stronger it gets. It's creating illusions to make us doubt ourselves until we can't tell what's real. It'll exploit our emotions to turn us against each other, just like it did with Dave. It has been in this asylum from the beginning, causing all the tragedies. It has possessed others, caused suicides, and spread misery and death. It craves something it can't have, life. Because it can't possess it, it will try to make us suffer." Kevin looked at her, exhaustion clear in his eyes. "I really don't want to hear about demons right now. I'm too tired." Noticing his distress, Tanya softened and took his hand. "Kevin," she said gently, "I know it's tough, but we have to stay strong. This evil force wants us to give in, but we can't let it win." She squeezed his hand. "Remember, it's all an illusion, none of it's real. We can't give it any more power. The more we fear give it, the stronger in this world it becomes." She gave his hand another squeeze and smiled. "I've connected with its energy. I know its weakness. We can defeat it, but only if we stay strong. It's the only way we are going to survive." Her voice was unwavering and confident, instilling a sense of hope in the midst of their despair. "Thank you, Tanya," Kevin said, a genuine smile breaking through. "I'm really glad you're here." Steve had to agree. It started with a few harmless noises, taps and creaks that seemed nothing at first. But the more they reacted, the more elaborate it became, until they began losing touch with reality. It felt like psychological warfare. After everything tonight, he was starting to believe, but there could still be a scientific explanation. He remembered reading that exposure to certain electromagnetic fields could induce feelings of dread or hallucinations, particularly in locations with paranormal reports. Could it all just be a mass hallucination? He hoped so. If the asylum was near active power lines or substations, those fields might explain some of the strange sensations they were experiencing. He wasn't sure if he was deluding himself, but he would much rather believe in that explanation than accept the existence of an evil entity. As they moved deeper into the dark corridor, their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. With no windows and solid walls surrounding them, not a hint of light remained. They were lost in the darkness once again. Kevin began to panic as fear washed over him. He tried to suppress it, but his anxiety only intensified. In the complete darkness, he felt exposed and vulnerable to an unseen attack. They stumbled blindly through the corridor, their steps echoing in the silence. The darkness seemed to have a weight, pressing in from all sides. With every step, Kevin sensed the walls closing in around them, as if the very structure of the building was alive and intent on trapping them. "Is the corridor getting narrower?" Kevin asked, his voice trembling. "It's just the darkness, playing tricks on you," Steve tried to reassure him. Suddenly, the walls began to rumble, concrete scraping against the floor. Tremors shook the ground, dust falling like sand. The walls inched closer. Panic churned in Kevin's stomach as the air thinned. He let go of Tanya's hand, trembling. Claustrophobia gripped him as the space grew more restrictive. The corridor seemed alive, constricting around him. Gasping for air, Kevin tried to turn back, but the path was equally narrow. His heart raced as he pushed forward, feeling trapped. Panic surged within him, his heart pounding as he felt the unyielding pressure closing in from both sides. The walls were slowly tightening around him. He could feel the space around him vanish. One wall pressed his back, another his chest. Each movement made it more suffocating. The pressure was a slow, tightening embrace threatening to crush him. Kevin gasped, his chest constricting, lungs begging for air. The walls closed in, closer, tighter until there seemed no room left to breathe. His body screamed for freedom, but the more he struggled, the tighter the grip became. "I can't breathe," Kevin shouted, panicking. He couldn't move, he was trapped tightly between the two walls. She could just make out his outline in the middle of the corridor and hear his desperate gasps. "I think he's having a panic attack," Steve said, with concern. This is it, Kevin thought, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. "I'm going to be crushed to death, slowly and painfully." "It's not real," Tanya insisted. "Remember what I told you." "Feels pretty fucking real to me." Kevin shot back, feeling the walls painfully press against his back and chest as he was wedged tighter and tighter. The pressure intensified, and he began to scream. Tanya shouted, "Listen to me." He was hysterical, gasping for air. "Help! I'm being crushed." His chest felt like it was collapsing, bones creaking under the pressure. "Kevin!" Tanya shouted, urgency lacing her voice. "Listen to me. Focus on my voice." The cold concrete wall pressed against his face, the rough surface scraping his skin. His screams were muffled, swallowed by the suffocating panic. "Kevin," Tanya's voice cut through the chaos, her words like a lifeline. "The walls can't actually crush you. We can see you, you're standing in the middle of the corridor, the walls are far on either side of you." "Can you hear me, Kevin?" she asked, her tone soothing. Her voice was muffled, but he could hear her. "Yes," he gasped. The concrete pressed against his face, making it impossible to breathe. His chest felt frozen, unable to expand, and the crushing pressure on his nose left him struggling for air. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the walls stopped closing in. Tanya shifted her tone, guiding him through a visualization exercise. "Imagine a light surrounding you, pushing back the darkness. Visualize it getting brighter and the walls moving away." "Can you see the light, Kevin?" she asked calmly. "The light is getting stronger, feel it expanding and pushing the walls away from you." Kevin squeezed his eyes shut, his mind desperately clinging to the image of light. His chest heaved, heart pounding, but then, suddenly, he noticed something. The suffocating pressure against his face was gone. He could breathe again. He hesitated, head spinning from the panic, and slowly opened his eyes as their flashlights flickered back to life. Kevin blinked, gradually focusing on the walls with his flashlight, now standing at their original distance. He inhaled deeply, his lungs filling with air once more, and he felt a surge of joy at the sensation of breathing freely again. "Welcome back, Kevin. None of it was real." "You're safe," she said, holding his hands tightly in hers. Tears streamed down Kevin's face. He felt a surge of relief. "Thank you, Tanya," he cried, his voice trembling. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms shaking with the weight of his relief. "Guys, good news, I know where we are," Steve said. They both looked to see him pointing up to a sign above the archway that read, "The Day Hall, the Gathering Place." A sense of calm settled over them as they stepped inside, the familiar surroundings of the vast day hall offering a welcome reassurance. Outside, the wind and rain battered the windows, and moonlight streamed through, casting a soft, silvery glow across the room. Kevin began to relax, finally free from the stifling darkness and the confined space, his body easing into the comforting openness.